Welcome to part 4 of Hacking the Tesla Safety Score. In this video, we'll be looking at aggressive turning and how to fix damage to your daily score from aggressive turning events. This is the final video in the series, and I saved the best, or should I say, the most difficult for last. If you haven't watched the first 3 videos in the series, please go and watch those first. It's easier to manage your Tesla safety score when you understand how it all works, and the introduction provides those details, along with tools which help. Part 2 covers hard braking and introduces the idea of condition windows, which will be used here too. I'll leave a link for those videos in the description, and a card for Hacking the Series playlist should be available in the upper right hand corner of this video right now. As covered in the series introduction video, being able to raise a safety score is based on driving many miles with a daily grade of 100 or at least 99. Overall safety score is determined by the daily grades weighted by the miles driven on that day. But there's nothing worse than after driving many miles on a day, you find an unsafe event occurred at some point and your daily score has dropped below 100%. Instead of having all those miles logged at the lower grade, let's restore that daily grade to 99 or 100 before the day ends. In this video, we'll explain how to reduce an aggressive turning penalty and raise the daily grade. To do this, first, we need to understand exactly what Tesla measures as an aggressive turn and how the unsafe percentage is defined. Looking at the safety score definition published by Tesla for aggressive turning, it's one of the longest descriptions they have. The description starts by defining aggressive turning as a left or right acceleration greater than 0.4 g. They go on to say this is equivalent to a change of speed at 8.9 miles per hour per second in the left or right direction. I'm not sure why they say left and right acceleration in one place and an increase in a vehicle's speed in another, because a change in speed is acceleration. The safety score is described as a proportion of time the car experiences a lateral, i.e. left or right acceleration greater than 0.4 g in either the left or right direction, relative to the time where the car's acceleration is greater than 0.2 g or 4.5 miles per hour per second in the left or right direction. Damn. We're racking up major bonus points for redundant information here. It also says autopilot is exempt from grading and the penalty is capped at 17.1%. Wow, that's a lot, but at least it makes perfect sense to someone who majored in physics, right? I didn't, and I'm assuming the same may be true for you too. I'm going to take a quick detour here to point out Tesla equates 0.2 g to 4.5 miles per hour per second and 0.4 g's to 8.9 miles per hour per second. But what catches my eye is that while 0.4 g is 2 times 0.2 g, 8.9 is not 2 times 4.5. So something isn't right. We have to assume one of these numbers is correct, but which one? 0.2 g or 4.5 miles per hour per second? 0.4 g or 8.9 miles per hour per second? I'm going to assume that the miles per hour per second values are wrong because 0.4 g is twice 0.2 g and 8.9 is not twice 4.5. So let's assume the miles per hour per second values are wrong. This is fine because the miles per hour per second values aren't any less confusing than the 0.2 g or 0.4 g values for most people, right? We're talking about things here which really aren't common knowledge, and this just adds to the confusion. Getting back on track, let's use my picture of a Ferrari yellow Model S to demonstrate how grading works. A car with little lateral movement will have a small acceleration in the left and right direction, and any acceleration between 0g and 0.2 g is excluded from grading. Tesla uses any acceleration greater than 0.2 g for determining aggressive turning, and this is our graded domain. From 0.2 g to 0.4 g is considered non-aggressive turning and where we want our turns to fall within. An acceleration greater than 0.4 g is considered aggressive. The aggressive turning percentage is calculated as the percentage of time turn acceleration is greater than 0.4 g relative to the time where the turn acceleration is greater than 0.2 g. This basically means divide the time greater than 0.4 g by the time greater than 0.2 g and you'll get a percent. For example, 20 seconds of lateral acceleration greater than 0.2 g, with 5 of those seconds being greater than 0.4 g, means dividing 5 seconds by 20 seconds for a grade of 25%. This percentage would be capped at 17.1% in the app. With an understanding of how the parameters are used to calculate our grade, let's dig a little deeper into the physics of a turn to understand how lateral acceleration applies to turns. This may be review for some, or helpful if you don't know or remember the physics of circular motion. In this video, the arrowhead points in the direction of the car's velocity vector. Notice how the direction changes as we move around the circular path. This is the source of acceleration in turns. Before we get deep into the turn, let's first look at the straight section in the upper left-hand corner. Here the car is traveling in a straight line. When driving in a straight line, all movement is forward. There is no lateral movement, so left-right acceleration is 0g, 0 feet per second, or 0 miles per hour per second. Whatever direction you face while moving along a straight line forward, there is 0 lateral acceleration. Things can get complex when a car is turning, as seen here. We'll keep it simple and we'll only look at 2 forces, velocity and centripetal. We'll ignore other forces like gravity, drag, and friction. This is a very simple model, but in order to understand the acceleration, we need to know a little about these 2 force vectors. Let's stop the video and look at a single moment in the car's path to look at the forces in play. The first force is the one keeping the car moving, and just like the straight line example, this force is also a forward force, meaning that if the second force is removed, the car continues on a straight line tangent to the last point on the turn. The car stays in the turn because of a centripetal force. This centripetal force is a dynamic force, and it'll explain why there's always acceleration during the turn. If we look at a simple free body diagram of the car, we can see the velocity vector runs tangent to the turn's path. The centripetal force is perpendicular to the velocity vector and always points towards the middle of the turn. If we look at another point in the turn, we can see the velocity vector has a different direction, but is still tangent to the path. Because the velocity vector direction is different, the centripetal force vector's direction is different too, but still perpendicular to the velocity vector. The change in the centripetal force vector is what keeps the car on the turn's path, and also what generates the acceleration through the turn because the car naturally wants to continue on its straight path. The centripetal force is what keeps that from happening. You may not realize you witness this all the time. Loose items slide around a car in turns because they don't have a centripetal force and are subject just to velocity and friction. Damn, we're 7 minutes into this video, but we finally got an understanding of lateral acceleration. This is going way slower than I had hoped, but stick with me. We're going to get to the fun stuff. Now that we've understood the forces at play, let's identify situations where lateral acceleration comes into play in normal driving. It's also important to note that unlike aggressive following, there is no minimum speed for aggressive turning. Grading happens at any speed, and this can be frustrating because there are so many situations which trigger aggressive turning events. For example, turning onto a road or a driveway at an incline can be enough if you accelerate into and through the turn. There's also accelerating while turning into traffic when you're attempting to slide into a gap between a couple cars. Another common situation is elevated highway cloverleaf ramps, where accelerating for the elevation change while reaching merge speeds can make for the perfect storm. Intersections where turns exceed 90 degrees can produce greater lateral acceleration too. And making a U-turn can easily exceed the 0.4 G, even at low speeds. I'm sure there are other situations too, so please leave a comment if you have any examples to share. My first aha moment with aggressive turning happened while researching how to undo aggressive following. That night I crossed over the midnight boundary, and when I got home I discovered 2 strange things in the app. First, my aggressive turning was at 1.9%, and the only questionable turn was a U-turn at an intersection. That may have been too fast at too small of a radius, but what that did was open my eyes to the problem. And what's more interesting, I noticed, is the app says I drove 22 miles in 14 minutes. If you do the math, for 22 miles in 14 minutes, that means I averaged 95 miles an hour for those 14 minutes. I was on a dark country road in deer country. I would have never been driving that fast on those roads under those conditions. Something with the app wasn't quite right, but I was done for the night. The next day, while driving to get a charge for my car, I unknowingly reduced my aggressive turning from 1.9 to 1.1, so this was going to be my starting point for my tests. Because any turn can produce the aggressive condition, and going super slow outside the graded range won't help reduce our aggressive percentage, it's critical we find this 0.2 to 0.4 G non-aggressive condition. Because increasing the time in the non-aggressive range increases the value of the denominator used to calculate the percentage, which makes our aggressive percent smaller. There are some tricks and methods which will help with that, and we'll cover that later. I started by trying to artificially increase my aggressive turning percentage and did so with 2 sharp turns and 1 donut in a parking lot. And I was able to increase from 1.1% to 5.8% over roughly 9 seconds. But 9 seconds for a 4.7% increase means I must have been driving for somewhere around 3 minutes safely to that point. And that was unexpected. Since it'll be impossible to improve our scores without understanding this 0.2 to 0.4 G range, let's look at ways to identify that. One of the first things people might consider is using an app for your phone to measure G-forces. Sounds like a great idea, right? Except for a couple things. One, you need to watch your phone while you're making turns, and that isn't really safe. And in addition to that, accelerometers in phones are notoriously unstable, and to make them have some sort of reliable, stable value that you could watch is not something most developers are going to get right. I've tried myself and it's tough. So instead of that, you may have noticed that I had a USB cable hanging from my rearview mirror, and that's acting like a pendulum. It's a crude pendulum, and we'll address that later. But while I'm out driving around, researching, the USB cable will have to suffice. I found a few parking lots and vacant streets to test with. The idea was to keep the turn radius constant and run several loops at a set speed while watching the pendulum and figure out where the aggressive turning starts and where it stops. I used the set steering wheel angle, which was measured using the car's CAN data. I spent around an hour making donuts and collecting data. I definitely got some strange looks. My aggressive turn percentage was improved from 5.8 to 2.2%, but after driving home, I was back at 3.9. Before any more testing, I needed a better pendulum. So I started with a piece of thread long enough to wrap around the rearview mirror several times and still reach the bottom of my monitor in my 3. I attached a Wego, which is a fancy wire nut. You most likely won't know what a Wego is, but that's fine. You can use any light plastic object. A big pen is a good choice because you can make a loop in the end of the thread, then loop that around the pen and under the cap as seen here. With the new pendulum, I headed to a rotary or roundabout, depending on where you're from. The only one nearby is fairly small, and I didn't expect much traffic in the middle of the afternoon, but that was incorrect. The number of cars made it difficult to maintain a constant speed and turning angle, so I went home and returned later that night. Testing after 10 was successful, but I wasn't really making a big change in my grade. I had done a lot of turn testing, so I didn't expect changes to be quick, but they were coming slower than expected. I needed a better result, and headed to a nearby shopping center to use their parking lot. Now I had a rough range for what an acceptable value for the pendulum was, and I just needed to verify everything would work correctly. In the parking lot, I made several runs between 0.3 of a mile and 1 mile. These test runs were extremely slow, taking about 5 minutes per mile. And we did get the percentage down to an acceptable level that returned the daily score back to 99. I had enough data to plot out the pendulum ranges for non-aggressive turning and aggressive turning as shown here for the Model 3. If the Model Y or refreshed S and X have monitors with similar placement in relationship to the rearview mirror, this guide would work for those too. If you have an older S or X, I made a good guess at the original S display, but the portrait orientation doesn't provide clear targets like the bottom corners of the monitor for the 3. When turning, the pendulum will swing, but if your turn is constant, the movement should be minimal. It should be stable enough to indicate your lateral velocity as seen here. It's tough to see, but it's a faint black line from the mirror to the monitor's bottom right corner. You can stabilize the movement by letting it rest on the back of your hand for a second and then letting it go free. If the pendulum is inside the gray section, there is no grading. The green section is non-aggressive turning, and the red section is aggressive. While researching highway ramps, I learned ramps have a design to keep the lateral acceleration around 0.17 G, which equates to a 10-degree displacement in their ball bank meter, which is really just a fancy pendulum. A 0.2 value is just above 11 degrees, and a 0.4 G is somewhere around 20 degrees, and that's how the template was designed. To reduce your aggressive turning percent, make turns using your foot to maintain a constant speed at a constant turning angle while keeping the pendulum in the area mapped green, which is basically pointing to the bottom corners of the display. For my 3, I found I could make a 60-foot diameter turn at 12 miles an hour with the bottom section of my steering wheel support positioned at 11 o'clock. And this should put the pendulum near the lower right-hand corner of my screen. If you have tricks for the pendulum and the other Teslas, please share those in the comments. Because making slow donuts in a vacant parking lot is not only slow, it's odd and uncomfortable. I wanted to find a better method for racking up non-aggressive time. A NASCAR racetrack would be the best option, but a highway ramp will do too. The best ramps are loops, like cloverleaf ramps, because the majority of the ramp is at a constant turn, and it's easy to find a non-aggressive speed of a circular path. The 4-leaf clover configuration would be optimal because it's possible on many of these to run a loop through all 4 leaves without ever getting on the highway. Unfortunately, I didn't have any of those nearby. In testing, I tried to do a 2-leaf U-turn with autopilot, and let me offer this warning. Don't try this. Autopilot wasn't able to handle this action well. After exiting the first ramp, the car accelerated as if to merge onto the highway, but at the same time it was heading for the second ramp without any sign of slowing down. I had to cancel autopilot on both tests, and that was extremely unsettling.
Jesus Christ. Holy crap. Oh my God. That was wrong. Wow. I was saving that clip. That was a 0.9, folks.
As I mentioned earlier, highway ramps are designed so the lateral acceleration does not exceed 0.17 g, because this is the highest we can go before people start feeling uncomfortable. Drivers can deal with higher values because they're anchored to the steering wheel, but passengers have a completely different experience. With this understanding, it should be pretty simple to find the optimum speed for non-aggressive turning on highway ramps. I made a spreadsheet with instructions for you to use. I'll put a link in the description. I suggest making a copy of my sheet so you can make changes without affecting anyone else doing work. Using Google Maps, you'll need to find a circular ramp to use for correcting your grade. We'll measure the diameter 2 times and put those values into the sheet. Give Google a moment to update the values in the velocity table. We'll then verify our measurements using the posted ramp speed, which should be between plus or minus 1 to 2 miles within our 0.17 g speed. If the 0.17 g value is off by more than 1 or 2, we should remeasure the diameter, making sure to go from edge to edge and through the center of the circle. So I'm looking at Google Maps near the RDU airport, and I'm looking for on-ramps that are circular in nature. And right here we have 2. I'm going to turn off some of the labels. So I'm going to click in the lower left and click on more, and then I'm going to uncheck the labels, and then I'm going to click on satellite, and then I'm going to close this by clicking the X, and then I'm going to go and look at the on-ramp I'm going to use, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and then I'm going to measure the distance, and I'm going to do this by right-clicking at a spot on the map. If I was on a Mac, I would use Option Click, but I'm on Windows, so I'll right-click and select Measure Distance. And then I'll go to the other side of the on-ramp in a circular spot. I don't want the entry and the exit. And I'll right-click again, and I'll select Distance from here. And as long as I'm on the curved spots and going through the middle of the circle, I should have a rough idea of the diameter of this on-ramp. And I'm going to go just inside. I'm going to zoom in and make sure that I'm just inside that edge. And then I'm going to look at my distance. And here I see it's 465. So I'm going to use that value in the spreadsheet, and I'm going to put that in the first diameter section, 465, and then I'm going to go back to the map, and I'm going to reposition the ends of the measurement tool so that I can get a second measurement, and this time I'm going to try and go somewhere still avoiding the straight sections. I'm going to once again zoom in a little bit and make sure I'm just inside that edge, and then I'm going to go through the middle of the circle to the other side, just inside the edge. And here I'm going to see my value is, 463. So I'm going to use that value. I'm going to place that into the spreadsheet. They're very close. And once the sheet recalculates, we'll see our new speed is calculated at 24 miles an hour. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to use Street View. So I'm going to grab this little guy in the right-hand corner and I'm going to drag him and drop him just about on the road. And then I'm going to spin around and see if I can see there it is, my ramp speed, 25 miles an hour. Comparing the speed limit to our 0.17G calculated value of 24 miles an hour, we're right where we want to be. So the speed we'll want to use on this ramp is 32 miles an hour, which is our 0.3G value. Notice this is slightly above the posted speed limit, which makes sense, since that was calculated with the 0.17G speed, and we want to be above 0.2Gs. After making a loop on this ramp at the 3G speed, your aggressive turning percentage should improve. If it doesn't, then you've driven too slow in the ungraded section. So increase your speed, but stay below the 0.4G speed. If your aggressive turning percentage got worse, then you've driven too fast, and you need to reduce your speed towards the 0.2G speed and make another pass. With any luck, the 0.3G value will be exactly what you need. Elevation changes were basically ignored, and that's why we confirmed the calculated 0.17G speed matches the posted speed limit. If there's an elevation change greater than 10 degrees, you might want to find a different ramp to use, because our math is based off of elevation changes between 6 and 8%. That's it for part 4 of hacking the Tesla safety score. I think aggressive turning is the most penalized of the unsafe driving criteria, even more so than unsafe following. Tesla drivers are penalized for situations which may meet the criteria for lateral acceleration, but really aren't that unsafe. We now have a good understanding of what lateral acceleration is and why it's an acceleration even when turning at a constant speed. We've identified several everyday situations that can result in aggressive turning events. You now have 2 methods to undo bad grades that result from aggressive turning events. We've covered how to make a simple and safe lightweight pendulum for judging your lateral acceleration in turns, and covered how the pendulum is affected by non-aggressive and aggressive turning forces. Finally, we covered what's likely the best option to counteract aggressive turning penalties by using highway ramps. Making non-aggressive turns on ramps is a great way to add 15 or more seconds to the denominator of the aggressive turning ratio. Experiment and find what works best for you. You can take extremely slow turns like a grandma or grandpa, and that's great for not being found aggressive, but this will do nothing when you've been penalized. Remember to give yourself time before the day ends to fix your bad grades before they become permanent at midnight. After reversing your daily aggressive turning percent below 4%, your daily grade may be 99 or even 100. With the good daily score, rack up the miles to increase your overall grade. Thanks for watching. Please click the like button and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already. If you subscribed, make sure you also click the bell to get notifications when future videos are released.